In 1317, authorities arrested over 300 people for gang activity along English trade routes. That was just the ones they caught. The real number? Historians estimate it was 10 times higher. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about medieval times. These weren't just petty thieves or desperate peasants. These were organized criminal empires that controlled entire cities, commanded armies, and made kings tremble. Medieval gangs weren't just real. They were the most terrifying criminal organizations in human history. Some wore scholarly robes while committing murder. Others disguised themselves as monks before robbing you blind. And the most dangerous ones? They were backed by the government itself. So why have historians kept this buried? And what exactly were they doing that made even the most powerful rulers nervous? Today we're diving deep into the dark underworld of medieval Europe to uncover the truth about these forgotten criminal empires that would make modern crime syndicates look like amateur hour. Welcome back to Life in the Dark Ages, where we explore the hidden stories that shaped our world. I'm your host, and today we're uncovering one of history's best-kept secrets, the rise and reign of medieval criminal gangs. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're about to embark on a journey that will completely change how you view the Middle Ages. Trust me, after today, you'll never look at medieval history the same way again. Let's start our journey in 1400s London, where the streets belonged to the shadows and the shadows belonged to killers. London in the 15th century wasn't just dangerous, it was a war zone. And the most feared name whispered in the darkest alleys was the Company of the Night. But here's what will blow your mind. These weren't desperate peasants fighting for scraps. The Company of the Night was made up primarily of wealthy merchant families, rich kids with too much time and too little supervision who decided that street fighting was the perfect hobby. Think about that for a moment. When you have everything you need, apparently the next logical step is terrorizing people who have nothing. These privileged psychopaths would strut around with daggers hanging from their belts as if carrying deadly weapons was perfectly normal behavior. And here's the kicker. Laws existed against bearing arms in certain areas, but enforcement was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. Markets transformed into battlegrounds where gang members would start fights over imaginary insults. Even areas near churches became killing fields, proving that religious buildings provided no protection against young men with anger issues and sharp objects. When arrests did happen, and that was rare, wealthy families had solutions ready. Bribery worked wonders on corrupt officials. Family connections could make court cases disappear entirely. Getting out of a medieval jail was easier than getting a good table at a popular tavern. You just needed the right connections and enough coin. London authorities attempted weapon bans in specific neighborhoods, but these laws had all the stopping power of a stern letter. Some groups operated for years without facing serious consequences, treating the city like their personal kingdom of terror. But the Company of the Night was just the beginning. The real nightmare was about to hit the countryside. If you thought the city streets were dangerous, wait until you hear about what was waiting for you on the open road. Medieval England's highways were about as safe as swimming with sharks while wearing a suit made of fish. Highway gangs had transformed every major road into a potential crime scene, turning travel into a game of chance where the stakes were your life and everything you owned. These criminals weren't desperate outlaws living in caves. They were organized professionals who approached robbery with the same planning that merchants use for legitimate business. The only difference was that their customer service involved considerably more threatening and significantly less smiling. Strategic positioning was everything in the highway robbery business. Gangs set up operations along trade routes, near dense forests, and around border regions where escape routes were plentiful. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Disguises became standard equipment for the clever groups. Some dressed as monks, counting on travelers to trust religious figures. Others wore fake Royal Guard uniforms. Nothing ruins your day quite like discovering that the helpful monk offering in 1317 alone, authorities arrested over 300 people for gang activity along English trade routes. That number represented only the criminals unlucky enough to get caught. The real number? Historians estimate it was at least 10 times higher. Merchants adapted by forming protective convoys and hiring armed escorts. Some groups established fake checkpoints where they collected illegal tolls from passing travelers. They offered protection from robbers while being the actual robbers, a business model that would make modern insurance companies weep with envy. But even these highway gangs would tremble before what was coming next. Because when medieval wars ended, something far more dangerous was born. When medieval wars ended, thousands of professional soldiers suddenly found themselves unemployed with very particular skill sets. Farming seemed boring compared to combat. So many former warriors decided to stay in the violence business as freelance criminals. They called themselves free companies, which sounded more respectable than criminal gangs. But the difference was mostly marketing. The White Company became one of the most notorious groups, operating like a traveling circus of armored destruction across England, France, and Italy. These weren't your typical street thugs. Professional soldiers turned to crime brought a certain quality to their robberies that amateur thieves simply couldn't match. They possessed military-grade weapons, swords, full armor, siege equipment, and cavalry units that could overwhelm most town defenses. Manor houses and wealthy nobles became preferred targets because they offered valuable loot and defensible positions for extended sieges. Here's how it worked. These gangs would surround a property, capture the owners, and demand enormous ransoms. Rich people discovered that having money made them popular in all the wrong ways. But the business model was brilliant in its twisted logic. Cities would hire these mercenary gangs to attack their enemies, paying substantial fees for their services. Once the job was finished, many free companies would immediately rob their former employers. They got paid twice for the same trip. Former knights and military commanders led these organizations, bringing battlefield tactics to criminal enterprises. They established proper command structures and operated like legitimate armies with robbery-focused mission statements. These armored criminals proved that chainmail and moral flexibility made a devastating combination. They could take on legitimate military forces and win, making them virtually unstoppable except by other professional armies. But here's where the story gets truly insane. Some criminals took their education very seriously, though they used it in ways that would make professors weep. Universities were supposed to create learned scholars. Instead, institutions like Oxford and Paris became training grounds for some of the most educated criminals in medieval Europe. Apparently, learning Latin and philosophy also came with advanced courses in intimidation and street fighting. These weren't polite academic disagreements. Town versus gown conflicts were violent confrontations that left actual bodies in actual streets. Students formed organized groups that terrorized local communities with the same enthusiasm they brought to their studies. Student protection rackets operated with remarkable efficiency. Groups would enter taverns and shops, consume whatever they wanted, then refuse payment while threatening violence. They turned dining and dashing into a scholarly pursuit, complete with Latin phrases and academic justification for theft. One particularly bold group kidnapped a tavern owner who dared criticize their wine selection, holding him until he apologized and promised better drinks. Most merchants learned to accept whatever students chose to pay, which was usually nothing. These academic criminals carried daggers and clubs while conducting illegal activities, sometimes fighting while still wearing their scholarly robes. The sight of someone getting stabbed by a person dressed for graduation probably confused witnesses about whether they were witnessing a crime or a very aggressive diploma ceremony. But here's the most infuriating part. Academic status provided protection that ordinary criminals could never access. Local authorities couldn't arrest many gang members due to university privileges. Student criminals enjoyed diplomatic immunity for domestic terrorism. Even religious students participated in these violent groups, proving that spiritual education didn't prevent skull-cracking when honor was at stake. The real problem was that local authorities often had no legal power to control these educated criminals. Which brings us to the darkest chapter of our story. Medieval corruption wasn't subtle. It was an open marketplace where justice was bought and sold like any other commodity. Local officials didn't just ignore criminal activity, they actively participated in protecting gang members through bribery and family connections. The most dangerous criminals often wore government robes instead of street clothes, making corruption fashionable and extremely profitable. Wealthy families used their social influence to shield relatives who were terrorizing neighborhoods. Court records from cities like York reveal the same names appearing repeatedly for violent crimes without ever facing meaningful punishment. Officials would mysteriously drop charges or conveniently lose evidence whenever certain families made requests. Justice was supposed to be blind, but apparently it was also deaf, dumb, and easily bribed. Some gangs became so bold that they established their own taxation systems, demanding protection fees from local vendors. Gang members would arrive at court hearings carrying bags of coins, knowing that financial arguments were more persuasive than legal evidence. Festival security became a particularly creative criminal enterprise. Gangs would volunteer to provide protection during public events, then use their official status to shake down vendors. They got paid by the city to commit crimes against citizens. These groups created independent territories within larger cities, proving that urban planning could be accomplished through violence and intimidation just as effectively as through proper government. But regular citizens weren't going to take this lying down. When the system failed them completely, they decided to take matters into their own hands. When official law enforcement failed completely, ordinary people decided to handle crime prevention themselves. Farmers, shopkeepers, and craftsmen formed unofficial patrols to protect their communities from gang violence. Fighting professional criminals with farm tools and hunting equipment was like bringing a pitchfork to a sword fight, except sometimes the pitchfork won through sheer determination. Villages developed ingenious defense strategies, including digging traps on roads to stop horse riding robbers. Captured gang members found themselves imprisoned in barns and cellars, while vigilante groups created their own legal systems. Punishments reflected community creativity. Public whipping sent messages. Head shaving marked criminals for easy identification. Banishment removed problems permanently without requiring imprisonment costs. Peace guilds formed in towns where individual action wasn't sufficient to handle organized criminal gangs. These coalitions created mini armies of angry shopkeepers and determined farmers. But these land-based criminal enterprises eventually expanded to include water-based opportunities. Medieval piracy represented organized crime taken to its maritime conclusion. The Vitalian brothers dominated the English Channel and North Sea with professional efficiency. They probably didn't have parrots or treasure maps, but they definitely had the weapons and attitude to make merchant sailors wish they'd chosen different careers. What made pirate gangs particularly dangerous was their semi-legitimate status during wartime. Kings and nobles would secretly support pirate groups, using them as unofficial naval forces. Government-sponsored piracy was apparently an early form of outsourcing military operations. One gang gained notoriety for kidnapping a bishop and demanding barrels of wine as ransom instead of gold. Apparently, even professional criminals understood that quality alcohol was more valuable than money when celebrating successful crimes. Coastal communities often found it cheaper to pay regular tribute to pirate gangs rather than constantly rebuilding after raids. Medieval piracy became so integrated into the wartime economy that many authorities stopped trying to eliminate it and instead focused on directing pirate attacks toward enemy nations. Medieval gangs demonstrated that organized crime has always been a persistent human problem, regardless of historical period or available technology. From the wealthy thugs of the Company of the Night to the educated killers of Oxford, from the armored mercenaries of the White Company to the government-sponsored pirates of the English Channel. These weren't just random criminals. They were organized, systematic, and in many cases more powerful than the governments that were supposed to stop them. The next time someone tells you that medieval times were simpler, remember the scholarly robes hiding daggers, the monks who were actually robbers, and the government officials who sold justice to the highest bidder. If this dark journey through medieval crime has fascinated you as much as it has me, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more hidden stories from the Dark Ages. What medieval topic would you like us to explore next? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to dive deeper into the violent world of medieval history, check out our playlist on medieval warfare and our video on medieval torture methods. I promise they're just as shocking as this one. Until next time, stay curious about the past and remember, history is always darker than they taught you in school.